Welcome to the Intentional Leader Podcast presented by Revolutionize Professional Coaching. We appreciate you listening in and learning with us. The stories and leadership tips you hear will help you become a great leader. Listen intentionally. Now, to our host, Sean Olson.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 30 of the Intentional Leader Podcast. This is the podcast where you hear the real stories of people just like you who have become extraordinary leaders. You'll learn some valuable lessons from their lives, lessons you can apply to become the leader that you were created to be. When you become an intentional leader, lives are changed. I'm your host, Sean Olson. I'm an executive coach, business owner, author, and speaker. Thank you for joining us today, listeners, on the Intentional Leader Podcast. I am excited to have you meet and hear from Alan Lazaros. Alan is a podcaster, a trainer, a business coach, and as his big-time day job, he is the CEO of Next Level University. Coming to us today from their headquarters up in the great Northeast Boston area. Alan, great to have you on the Intentional Leader Podcast.
What an awesome intro. I have listened to several episodes of your podcast, of this podcast, in preparation for this, and I really appreciate the opening of Leaders Change Lives. I forget the exact verbiage, but intentional leadership changes lives, something like that?
It changes lives. Absolutely.
Leadership, as we mentioned in the pre-call, you and I had a pre-interview.
Yeah.
And leadership is, without a question, what I believe to be the hardest thing in the entire world.
I agree.
But also the most meaningful. And, I've done a lot of different jobs, a lot of different roles, a lot of different corporate entrepreneur. But leadership has been a through line my entire life looking back. And leadership, in my opinion, is the hardest but most meaningful work and most important work. And I think more people are actually leaders than give themselves credit. So yeah, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
I agree. And that's what I like about what we're trying to do on this podcast is help everyday people realize they can be a great leader. People always ask that nature nurture question on leadership. I think anybody can develop the skills to do it, but it's not soft skills. It's actually just critical skills to become a leader. So you're aware of this from having listened to some, and for our listening audience, we always start with the same question for our guests, and that is kind of give us a quick walkthrough of your professional history, but even more than that, leadership lessons learned along the way. So I know, Alan, your journey is not incredibly long in duration, but I know it's been in fact impactful. So take us on that walk.
So for those of you on video, I often joke, I look 35. I'm hoping to hit puberty at 36. So I'm actually 35, rather. I look 15, and I'm hoping to hit puberty at 36.
It's the Doogie Howser effect, absolutely.
Yeah. And I think it's an important question because before you're going to learn from someone, I think you need to understand where they've been. I think you need to understand the context of what they've experienced. I think it's really important to know who you're talking to. So it's not just the message, it's the messenger. So again, how do I condense 35 years into one podcast? The truth is you can't do that. But that said, I have since rewatched the movie of my own life, so to speak, many, many times over the last several years, especially podcasting, training, coaching, speaking, and leading the company. Every single year, I kind of look back at my entire life and I try to reassess it from this new awareness. And so when I tell this story about my life, not only is it going to be a condensed version, but it's also going to be my new understanding of it. At the time, I had no idea half of the stuff I'm going to say, but It's kind of like when you watch a movie as a kid and then you rewatch it as an adult. And now all of a sudden you understand all the nuances that you didn't get back then. So
absolutely.
All right. So I'm 2 years old. And unfortunately, my father passed away in a car accident when he was 28 years old.
Wow.
My mom and older sister, my sister's 6 at the time, I'm 2. My mom is 31. She was a stay-at-home mom, and she didn't really know what to do. She got together with my stepfather at that time. So my real last name is actually McCorkle. My stepfather's last name is Lazaros. And I had a stepfather from age 3 to 14. And at 14 years old, my stepfather left my family, and I didn't understand any of this at the time, but I've since reflected a lot on it, like I mentioned, and I now understand that I sort of lost 3 families by the time I was 14 years old. And I kind of became the sort of proverbial man of the house at 14. So when my father passed away at 2 and my stepfather came into the picture, we didn't see my birth father's extended family much. My mom and pop up and that side of the family, we kind of didn't see them almost at all. And I got close with my stepfather's side of the family, Grandma Joan and Grandpa George and their kids and Uncle Kevin and that whole thing. And then I had my mom's side of the family. When my stepfather left at 14, he took his family with him, so to speak. Haven't seen any of them since, as a matter of fact. And my mom, and we still kind of hadn't spent much time with my birth father's side either, because we were trying to be a family unit, changed my last name, that whole thing. And again, I didn't know any of this back then. And then my mom and her older sister actually got in a really bad tiff, argument, fight, where she sort of ostracized us from that side of the family as well. And that was right after my mom's parents passed away as well. And so I, again, at 14, didn't know this, but now reflecting back, it's one of those whoa moments for me of, so I essentially lost 3 families by the time I'm 14 years old.
My goodness.
And it was really hard. And I remember back in high school, people would say, these are the best years of your life. These are the best years of your life. These are your best years of your life. And I remember thinking, God, I hope not.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I now realize why they were saying that. And it's definitely not the case. So I'm 14 and we go from stepfather leaving with all the income, taking the income with him. He gets the apartments and the apartment building and the yacht. We get the home and the dog, and he takes the income with him. Early 2000s, late 90s. And I go from basically, ski trips, boats, snowmobiles, Xbox and Dreamcast, fairly well off financially, to basically I get free lunch at school now because our income is so low.
Wow.
And so I didn't know how I was going to go to college. And so I decided to bootstrap my way through high school. I got straight A's. I got 189 in English, which I just have to say because I want to be honest. But I got what's called the President's Award, and I got into my dream college. My dream college was Worcester Polytechnic Institute. It's kind of like a mini MIT for those who don't know, but it's a really hard school to get into. And it was my dream. My uncle had gone there, and it was my dream. So I did it. I got as much scholarships and financial aid as possible because it was, at the time, I don't know if it still is. It probably still is, but it was one of the most expensive undergraduate colleges in the world at the time. It was $50,000 a year way back then.
That's a lot of cash.
It was a lot. So I got my computer engineering degree there, graduated with distinction, and I stayed for my MBA. I went into corporate, and I did what I thought I had to do to make as much money as possible. So I went from 65 to 85, 85 to 105, 105 to 125, and then I capped nearly around 200 before my own car accident that I'm going to briefly share here. So, and I did a lot of job hopping, by the way. I mean, obviously I didn't just jump the pay scale that quickly. I eventually ended up at a company called Cognex. I started an inside sales engineering team there. They sold industrial automation equipment, machine vision equipment into manufacturing facilities. And essentially, I went from inside sales to promoted to outside sales. And I managed a territory. So I had Vermont, Western Massachusetts, and Connecticut as my territory. And I was on the road, and I was in manufacturing facilities selling industrial automation equipment. I'm up in New Hampshire. We're not partying. We're not doing anything crazy. We're going to TGI Fridays, and it's a Saturday night, Friday night, something like that. And this was back in 2016 when the winter was really bad. And the snowbanks were covering the signs. That's how bad the winter was in New Hampshire.
Wow, it's pretty hefty.
It was a lot. And then so there was a yield sign that was covered. I was supposed to yield, and I didn't. I was at a fork. I end up on the wrong side of the road, looking down at the GPS. I look up, and I saw what I thought was a Mack truck right in front of my car. And I thought for certain, 100%, no chance, we are done. This is it. It's the end. Fortunately, it was not a Mack truck. If it was a Mack truck, there's no question I'd be dead. It was not. It was a lift-kitted pickup truck, and I had a car that to this day I know saved my life. I drove a 2004 Volkswagen Passat that I used to call the steel. I used to call it the tank, and it's a German-engineered steel trap of a car, and both airbags did deploy. I was trying to save money, so I bought a 2004 in cash while I was paying off all my school debt, and this car ended up saving my life. So both airbags did deploy. My cousin and I are okay. He's 17 at the time, not really rattled that much, tweeting about it. And for me, I'm just completely disassociated. My father passed away when he was 28 in a car accident.
Right.
And so I'm 26 at the time. And that could have been it for me is a whole nother level, because while I didn't see my dad's side of the family a ton, whenever I did see them, they would all look at me because I looked just like my father. And my whole life I'd hear stories about John, my dad.
Mm-hmm.
And so I saw the effect of what a car accident and an early death can do on a family. And so for me, that was my quarter life crisis.
Yeah.
And so physically I was okay, but mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, I definitely wasn't. And the best way I can articulate it now, even though at the time I had no clue what was happening to me, is I was drowning in regret. I wasn't proud of who I became. I wasn't taking my health seriously. I was drinking too much and too often. I was achieving at the expense of fulfillment. And I had the quote unquote American dream, beautiful girlfriend, 6-figure plus salary, 1% earner globally. And I say earner, not net worth. That's an important distinction. But everything I thought that I wanted, to take care of my family, all that stuff. And now I realize in hindsight that I was achieving at the expense of fulfillment, and I was successful from the outside in rather than from the inside out.
Yeah.
And after that quarter life crisis, I flipped the script completely, and I got obsessed with personal growth, personal development, self-improvement. And I focus more now on fulfillment and alignment, and then letting success sort of be a byproduct of that. And so I learned a really hard lesson really early, a lot earlier than a lot of people learn it. And I'm very grateful for that. And so now I'm here 9 years later, and I built a company called Next Level University that is, instead of automation equipment really kind of taking jobs, now I have a company that is designed around how to help people create bigger, better, brighter futures for themselves and for others. And it's really something I can be proud of now. So
Fantastic. Well, thank you first off for being open and vulnerable. And listeners, that's honestly, it's one of the greatest keys to leadership today is being real and being vulnerable and not being afraid to share your story, even when there's difficulties in our stories and failures in our stories, whatever the case may be. I really appreciate the story. I appreciate the wake up call through that accident. Here's a question that I thought of as you were describing that. I love the fact that you were talking about, externally you were successful, internally not so much. Things were out of control in different ways. Did you feel that prior to the accident, and the accident made you deal with it? Or was it like the accident was both the revelation and the drive to push forward with it?
yeah, it's a phenomenal question. And I think that's something we should all be kind of contemplating. Again, in hindsight, it's very clear that those whispers were there. And I often talk about with my clients and on the podcast and with my business partner, Kev, that the whisper, if you don't listen, eventually it's going to become a scream. And for me, the car accident exacerbated something that was already inside, kind of crying for help, so to speak. And it just became more obvious, more abrupt, more sudden when I faced my near-death experience. And I think that the truth is, in hindsight, it's very clear that my intuition, my highest self was trying to tell me, hey, you're not aligned. Hey, you're not fulfilled. Hey, there's got to be more. Hey, this work isn't really what you thought it was going to be. But I didn't listen, and inevitably that all comes to a head eventually.
It does. I love that phrase that it went from a whisper to a scream with the accident. And, I'm always looking at what can I learn from people's stories. And I even think about my journey and my path and where I had a career change because of holes in my life. So similar to you, didn't take a car wreck for me. It took getting fired, right? But it was still a traumatic thing in its own way. And so listeners, that's my big thing to you, just as a challenge to hear from Alan's story, is pay attention to the whispers and turn up the volume and make a change. And so that's kind of what's inspired Next Level University and what you're doing, right? You want to pass that same skill set on to people. I know one of the things that you are huge on, and I appreciate this side of it. And this is your computer engineering side of you. But you talk about the 4 modalities of thinking. Can you just quickly tell us what those 4 are and then break those down one by one?
Yeah, so I actually kind of stumbled upon these just so for context, I've surpassed now my 5,000th coaching session. You mentioned the computer engineer thing. Metrics are everything to me. I love numbers.
Mm-hmm.
Ever since I was a gamer, I used to,
Exactly.
study the numbers. I'm 20th in the world at Halo 2, and so metrics, what's your kill to death ratio in the video games and all that. So I'm a nerd. So bear with me. The modalities of thinking I stumbled across in one-on-one coaching. So that's 5,000 hours with one-on-one individuals. So my youngest client is 18, my oldest is 63. And so all different countries, all different industries, all different backgrounds. I mean, it's just been I often say I've learned more from my clients than they've learned from me.
Mm-hmm.
Not necessarily any one of them, but the collective is just unbelievable.
Absolutely.
So I came across these 4 modalities of thinking because I was starting to understand that Kevin, my business partner, my co-host of the podcast, was resonating with people more than me. And for me, I intellectually love to understand everything. I'm always asking, like, why? Why is that? So we would host events. We host an event called Next Level Live every year, and it used to be rebranded as a bunch of different things. But I thought that I added more value, genuinely, authentically, as arrogant as that might sound, and I would realize that the audience always liked his speech better.
Mm-hmm.
And it made no sense to me. I didn't understand why. And so now I've matured and I realize, okay, so if it was a room of computer engineers, they would probably resonate more with me.
Right.
But he thinks in a different modality than I do. He thinks in words. He used to rap. He's emotionally driven. And he thinks in words. And so people who are emotionally driven tend to resonate more with Kevin. People who think in numbers, that's my modality of thinking, which is statistically rarer. Even me saying statistically rarer is my modality of thinking.
Proves it, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so when there's 1,000 people in a room, we'll use 100. If there's 100 people in a room, I always say 97 of them will like Kevin more. But 3 of them will resonate so much more with me. And it's a joke, but essentially the 4 modalities are this. Number 1 is numbers. It's not number 1. It's actually the rarest, and it's just mine, so I say it first. Number 2 is words. Most people think in words. They think in conversation.
Mm-hmm.
The 3rd is pictures, images, imagination. So, for example, all of us can imagine our car right now and what color it is, and is it 2-door or 4-door? So that kind of thing. And then the last one is energy, and that's an uncommon one too. And that was my least effective.
Mm-hmm.
And so we all have all 4. I like to think of we all have 2 arms and 2 legs. Hopefully not everyone, but in this analogy.
Yeah.
And if you want to play a sport that requires a lot of skill, you're going to have to learn to use both arms and both legs. And that's kind of the leadership frame that I go from, because I want to be a strong communicator. I want to be a strong leader. I want to grow and scale an effective business. And I realized I can't do that unless I learn how to communicate with different types of people.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized that a lot of what I share with people just wasn't landing. I tend to be much more much more clouds than dirt.
Yeah.
I tend to, so I had to practice storytelling. I had to practice these other things. So those are the 4 modalities. There's words, there's pictures, there's numbers, and there's energy. And everyone has a really strong one. Sort of how we're all righty or lefty. Everyone's got one dominant modality of thinking. And it's ironic because we all think everyone else is wrong. And all of us are actually wrong. We're just looking from a different lens,
Mm-hmm.
And so there is no right or wrong, but there is more optimal. And by more optimal, I mean, if you're a words thinker, you're going to resonate a little less than someone who is a numbers thinker, most likely with me.
Right. So I like those. They're all pretty self-explanatory. The one that maybe we need a little bit of definition around is the energy piece. How does it come across? How do we know if that's our way of thinking?
So a lot of people will share a word called empath, and I can't begin to pretend that I know a ton of research around what an empath is or if I am one or anything like that. But what I have come to understand is that a lot of people who had challenging childhoods or alcoholic parents or were in dangerous environments, they tend to sense energy and vibe better. Now, I had mentioned that energy is my not so good one. I think unconsciously it was a good one. In other words, I can sense the emotional state of other people easily because growing up, my mom and stepdad didn't get along well, and I could always tell when it was going to be a tough night. And so the energy one, I think, is more of a feeling. And I think, so for example, if I said, hey, my name's Alan, and I believe I can achieve my dreams, that's not an arrogant energy, even though it might be an arrogant sounding statement.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas someone who doesn't actually believe in themselves would be like, oh yeah, I can totally achieve all my dreams. And you can tell it's an arrogant energy. And so the energy one is more intuitive. And what I've started to do is take my unconscious ability to feel energy and try to bring it to my conscious awareness. So I was unconsciously letting energy sort of drive social dynamics. And now I'm really tapping into it a lot thanks to my beautiful girlfriend, because she has energy as her strongest one.
Yeah, I like that. So when I'm thinking through there, yours is the numbers or the math one. Kevin, your partner in the business is words. I can identify people who are pictures. Mine actually probably is either words or energy or a combination thereof. So how do you take this? I know you coach a lot on the individual level. And as a leader, I'm a firm believer the difference between a manager and a leader. Managers say you adapt to me. Leaders say I'm going to adapt to you. And that's where it's important to understand the modality of thinking of the people that we're leading and where they're coming from and who they are, so we can adapt to them to take them as far as we can. But on a team level, how can you use these modalities to really enhance and build a team? You built a team at Next Level University. How do you take, you and Kevin are different. I'm going to assume some of the other people on your team are also different. So how can we use this productively to develop a cohesive team?
Well, so it's the standard go to where they are first. And the interesting thing is you kind of can't go to where they are first unless you also practice that. So for example, Algebra 1, Algebra 2, geometry, trigonometry, Calc 1, Calc 2, differential equations, all that stuff. As a leader, I can't bring people to where I am in an instant because it's taken 35 years to accumulate where I've gotten to. And they can't take me to where they are in an instant. So you have to sort of identify the differences immediately and the similarities, and then connect on the similarities and then benefit from the differences. So for example, I always say this: if what you wanted was what you needed, you'd already have it.
Correct.
And you have, it's so fascinating. I always say, if you want to coach with me, you probably need Kevin. If you want to coach with Kevin, you probably need me. And what I mean by that is, if you're not a natural numbers thinker, I'm going to benefit you tremendously, because what a huge blind spot. And so what I try to do is help heart-driven individuals that are emotionally driven build and scale their businesses, because they need a numbers thinker in their corner who gets them. And so you kind of have to practice all four if you want to be a leader, and you have to practice identifying who's who and what's what. And I actually have an easier way to frame this that might help people. So I created something called the PMES system, and it just stands for physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual. People who, we all have a code. We all have all four, right? We all have a physical being, a mental being, an emotional being, and a spiritual being. So all of us have all four, but we have a big one. So mine's M first. I'm very head heavy, so to speak. I'm not necessarily, like, you wouldn't expect me to be a yoga teacher, right? I'm an engineer. I'm probably not a yoga teacher. It doesn't mean I can't be. It just means it's not my natural. So if I'm communicating with a yoga teacher, she's probably S first, or he is probably S first, mostly energy first. I'm going to benefit tremendously from a yoga teacher because they're going to help me center up and learn energy. And I'm going to benefit them tremendously because I'm going to help them track their numbers and make more money and flourish in the economy. What I find really hard is that most people are not, you don't see a lot of yoga teachers hanging out with computer engineers. Right? We like people that are like us, but that's the problem. We end up really not well-rounded because we're not learning from each other the way that we could or should, because we're constantly triggering each other. So someone who's really financially successful and really good at numbers triggers someone who's insecure about finance. And someone who's really in great shape, like a yoga instructor, triggers someone who's a nerdy engineer. And so we kind of avoid the very thing that we need most. And as a leader, it's your job to bridge that gap.
Absolutely. It's funny to hear you talk about the coaching work that you and Kevin do, and that they may want a numbers person, so you give them Kevin instead because it's what they need, not what they want necessarily. In our company, with all of our coaching, my Kevin, his name is Andy. I'll draw the comparison to you two, but it's reversed, right? Where Andy's our math guy, he's the mental guy, he's the numbers guy, creating processes. I'm more the big picture visionary side. So it's flipped in those roles. But anytime we have a coaching client, Andy interviews them first. And it's a coach match interview where he's talking to them about, what do you want to grow in? And do you have preferences on like a male or female coach, different things like that. And they think we're going to give them a coach that matches their preferences.
Wow.
We're not necessarily. Yeah. A lot of times we're going to tell them, okay, you want this, this, and this, but our job as a coach is to actually make you uncomfortable, not comfortable. So the worst thing we can do for you and your growth is to give you somebody who's just like you and is going to keep you in your comfort zone.
Yep.
And it floors people. And some of them, even initially, they're like, well, I'm not sure if I like that. We're like, just trust the process.
Nice.
And then before it's even halfway through the process, they're like, this is awesome. It's stretching me. It's making me uncomfortable. And I'm sensing the ability to grow. But that also means that we have to be open to growing, right? Leaders are learners, and we have to get uncomfortable. In the physical world, working out, it's no pain, no gain. Mm-hmm. In the world of leadership and understanding people, there is no growth and comfort.
It's the hardest thing in the entire world, in my opinion. I people often ask, well, how did you create a 21-person team? And I'm playful with this, but massive pain and failure.
Mm-hmm.
Massive pain and failing forward. I just don't believe you can learn everything from a book. I think you should read books. I think you should read every leadership book there is. I think you should listen to every leadership podcast that's credible. But at the end of the day, you're going to have to go and screw it on up. And, after 5,000 sessions, you just start to notice these patterns of people and individuals from all different cultures and all different modalities. And you just learn how to speak each language. But it's really painful. And I'm with you. I think that's a great idea. They think you're going to match with a person that they want, when in reality, what you're doing is creating a complementary skill sets situation that can illuminate blind spots. Because that's the thing about strengths and weaknesses. And this is a leadership lesson too. If you believe in yourself at level 10, you've got a huge blind spot. Your team doesn't. Your team definitely doesn't. They don't believe in themselves like you do. So you seem arrogant, right? That's the thing, is every strength. Okay. Level 10 self-belief, huge strength. Okay. What's the weakness? Arrogance, overconfidence, over-optimism, right? And so every single strength I've ever had comes with this massive blind spot that just is so hard to overcome. And so you have to stay open to others' opinions, but not so open that you're taking everyone's word as gospel. You have to stay, super disciplined and regimented, but also adapt and flex. And so I love the idea of the and instead of the or. It's emotionally driven and numbers driven. It's righty and lefty. And every business, every company, every organization needs to find a way to create a culture where the core values and the goals and the aspirations and the purpose is aligned, but everyone has different core competencies and different unique strengths and weaknesses. Mm-hmm. And I think that if you can do that, it creates this really cool yin and yang situation. And I always say, you got to make sure your yins are yanging.
Yeah. I had somebody else describes that similar scenario, and they said it's kind of like, we have this incredible world to have this color television, right? All these different people that intersect in our life and our teams and our friendships. And there's the color, and the color is the differences that we have. Mm-hmm. And unconsciously, we ultimately, by the time this guy was saying, by the time we're 40 years old, we put ourselves back in front of the black and white TV.
I know.
It's all the same. And there's no color in it, right? Because partially it's a societal thing that we can't overcome, where society is trying to draw out differences as a problem. just because we're different doesn't mean it's a problem. It just means it's different. So let's learn from one another and get something out of it. So I want to transition for a second. One of the things you told me in our pre-interview is you made a simple phrase, but I want you to dive into it. You said that most leadership is unconscious. What did you mean by that, and what do we do about that?
I've never been asked this question before, so I really appreciate it. And I've been saying this quite a bit this year. I guess last year, 2023, and this year too. But yeah. And this is new to me, but when I say leadership is unconscious, what I mean by that is everyone's watching. Everyone's watching. So, for example, we have this Dreamliner journal, and it's new, and it's got this mountain on the front of it. It was actually really cool. A listener reached out and said they wanted to get this tattooed. It's got this like mountain with this star at the top, and
Nice.
we're all kind of climbing our own mountain. Make sure you're climbing your own mountain, not someone else's type of thing. And anyways, it's a journal, and that's great, and we sell it. Achieve your dreams 90 days at a time. But I'm not ever not going to use this.
Mm-hmm.
If I don't use this every single day, why should someone else buy it? You know, and so I think when my whole team is using them, not because I told them they have to, but because I'm using it and benefiting from it, and then talking authentically about how much I'm benefiting from it. And then it naturally catches on. I'll give you one more example too that has been really powerful, and I never thought that this would happen. So this is really cool. 2 years ago, almost 2 years ago, March 1st, 2022, Emilia and I had a conversation. She had someone reach out to her that I think is kind of full of it.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, I'm going to do an 80-day fitness challenge. And she was, feeding into it and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, she's a cheerleader for everybody. So she wants to see everyone win. And people like that tend to be naive, myself included. And I said, sweetheart, he's not going to do that. And she's like, well, what do you mean? And I said, he talks all the time. He never actually does it. And I'm not trying to be unkind because I actually like this person a lot, but they are a little full of it, right? Mm-hmm. And I said, and she got really upset. And she's like, well, let's us do it. Let's do it. Me and you. And I said, well, my old best is 3.5 months. I exercised in the past for 3.5 months. I never missed a day. Mm-hmm. I said, and she said, let's do it. I said, all right, my goal is to beat my old best. So we did 30 minutes a day. Soccer counts, basketball counts, jogging counts, walking counts, weight training counts, right? So pretty much moving your body for 30 minutes a day,
right,
consistently counts. Now, we did it and we hit the 4-month mark in 120 days. And it was like, whoa, okay, well, I'm not going to stop now. Let's keep going. Eventually we hit the year mark. Now we're coming up on the second year. I would have to ask SIRI if I say it, my phone's going to go off. So. But I would have to ask in order to figure out how many days it's been, but I know it's almost 700 days.
Wow.
And my point of all this is leadership is unconscious. My whole team has streaks going. One of my team members, Brandon, has run a mile a day for more than an entire year.
My goodness.
And everyone has these streaks going. And I had never intended on that. It just was this, we call it the NLU Fit Pick Challenge. And we just started it, Emilia and I, and she calls it Team Evolve Move. She has her own company called Evolve Ventures. And now there's other people doing it. Now, here's the lesson for all of us, myself included. If I were to suddenly stop doing it, I bet you other people would unconsciously stop doing it. And they would have no idea why they started or stopped. And it's nothing against them. And it's not because I'm so great. It's just we rub off on each other. We are always, always, always rubbing off on each other. Yep. And to me, leading by example is by far the most important thing in the entire world.
Yeah. I love that example. I love the idea of what leadership is unconscious is. The irony is it's kind of like the opposite of this podcast, right? The podcast is called the Intentional Leader Podcast, where everything is intentional, but it's not. You're just giving a different perspective on the same things. What you're saying is the two of you had to be intentional at doing this. You had to be intentional with your journal. And when you're intentional on those things, it not only benefits you, but your team is watching, your team begins to emulate it, do those different things. And I think it's so important for leaders to realize, good or bad, you're under a microscope. Your people are
Oh yeah.
watching. And what you do impacts what they do. How you do it impacts how they do it. How you say it impacts how they say it. And that's why it's so important to be intentional about it. Because unconsciously they're doing those things. They're not always sitting back and going like, hey, I want to be like Alan, so I'm going to do these things. That's not what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
But you're the CEO and they're watching. And so it's unconsciously they're following. But for you as the leader, we've got to be intentional because they're paying attention. And, it's kind of a joke I have with people all the time when we're coaching them and they're complaining about their team, which happens. And I'm sure you run into that too. I asked them a question. I'm like, how long have you been leading that team? If they've been leading that team less than 24 months, I will give them some grace and we'll coach through how they can develop their team in a better way. If they've been leading their team more than 24 months, I just look at them and say, well, it's your fault. 24 months after the fact, if your team isn't where you want it to be, that's on you because you're the leader. You should have them up to speed and ready to go by being intentional. And then unconsciously, they're going to follow those same patterns.
It's interesting. That's a hell of a grace period. You know what I mean?
It
I
is.
appreciate
It
it.
is.
I do. Yeah. Well, that's the duality, right? And we haven't gotten into this yet, but I would love to if you're game. Duality, I think, is everything, which is the ability to hold two seemingly opposing ideas in your consciousness simultaneously, which goes back to the and thing. It's yin and yang. It's not one or the other. It's right and lefty. It's be a servant leader and be assertive when you have to, right? So it's an and. But when it comes to the intentional versus the unconscious thing, you have to be intentional and you have to know that other people are unconsciously watching. And then as you lead them, and this is the big leadership question right here, what is the right amount of responsibility to take? Because if they're on your team and if that's your choice, you can complain about them all you want, but you're still choosing to have them on your team.
Mm-hmm.
We had to let someone go 2 days ago and there was a grace period and I sat down with the team leader and I said, I put the core values. I was on Zoom and I pulled up the whiteboard and I put the core values. The core values for NLU is number 1, growth mindset. Number 2 is impact, which means service oriented. And then the third is humility, and by far the most important. Seriously. Yeah. And then this sub team, this department, it's Next Level Podcast Solutions. It's a podcast production company. It has 3 of its own sort of core values, and I'll go through them quickly. Responsiveness is number 1 because our clients need stuff quick, and we're all in different time zones, right? And then reliability is huge. You can't mess someone's episode up and have it go public. And then the last one is work ethic. And so I said 0 to 10, this person, where are they at? And they're like, Alan. I'm like, That's it. That's it. Let's be kind. But it's time to go. And this is not the fit for this person. We're going to be a pain in your butt because we're always on.
Yeah.
And you're going to be a pain in our butt because you're always not. And so it's just not aligned on a core value. I don't want to work with people who don't want to work hard. I'm going to be a pain in your butt. Like, don't be a country singer at a rap concert, right? You gotta understand that you have a responsibility with your team. If they're on your team, it kind of is on you. But if you take too much responsibility, you're going to burn to the ground and be a martyr. So everything's got to.
Yeah, but you made it. You made a big piece out of this, though, is you got to make the tough decisions, right? And when we let people go, we also have to set them up for success elsewhere, helping them understand why they're being let go. In this sense, there was kind of, the issue of a misalignment on some of the values, but what that looks like for them. And we want to set them up where, like, this is the type of organization you will thrive in. Mm-hmm. So not Next Level University, but you could thrive in this type of a deal. But leaders kind of shy away from the tough decisions at times. And that's where it is with your team, is if you have done everything that you can do to be building up your team and everybody's excelling except for that one probably doesn't want to excel, never is going to. You have to make those tough decisions. So yeah, the duality of intentionality, the unconscious, but leadership is hard. We have to make tough decisions.
That's the hardest part. For me, the hardest part of leadership is courage. Mm-hmm. I feel courageous in my ability to execute against tasks. I don't feel super courageous when it comes to difficult conversations that are uncomfortable, and that I think I'm afraid to hurt people's feelings.
Yep.
I mean, even in this episode, there are certain ways I've phrased things. It's like, is that going to come off bad? Is that toxic? This kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that every leader is going to have a kryptonite. And I think that the value I can add is find yours soon. Because for me, it's courage. I'm certain of it. I'm just not as courageous as I need to be in my communication. You need care and candor. And I think all of us are on one end or the other.
Absolutely.
Too much care, not enough candor, or too much candor, not enough care. For me, I have trouble with the candor part because I'm afraid to hurt people. And even that person, you should have seen the message we sent. I mean, it was the kindest message you'll ever get,
Absolutely.
Even though, we lost money and it was not optimal, and this person, it's kind of on them, but it's on us too, because we decided to make the decision. So, but you got to be caring, and people need to know that you care, but you also have to be candid.
Mm-hmm.
We're not here to, you know what I mean? We're not here to have fun. Like, we can have fun, but that's not the purpose of the organization.
Right.
We can have fun anywhere, right? We just go to the beach. That's not the goal. And for me, I want to do deeply meaningful work in the world. And I would rather do that than go to the beach. So if you're here to have fun, it's not going to work, because I'm not that fun. I want to change the world at one person at a time, one leader at a time. I want to empower people. And I think life is a serious game. And I believe we need to take it seriously. It doesn't mean we can't have fun. It doesn't mean we don't laugh and joke. It's just, I think life is serious, and I think we got to take it seriously. And I had one person in my past, I think this will be indicative. It was an ex-girlfriend of mine. She said, dating you is like dating a Stairmaster. You just are always going, and the point for the listeners, that is who I am. It's who I've always been. It's who I'm always going to be. I'm exhausting. I get it. Even you listening to this, you're like, wow, this dude's dialed up. This is the mode that I have. I very rarely am not engaged at this level. I don't want to hang out. I don't want to constantly rest and relax. I want to be as productive and effective as possible. And if that's something that ignites you, we're going to do great work together.
Yep.
If it's something that drains you, you're going to want to run for the hills, and then I'm going to feel bad about myself because you didn't like me. So I think as a leader, you have to have self-awareness. Self-awareness is like the most important thing. And what I've found is people who think they have high self-awareness actually don't. And I'm only getting to the point now where I feel like I'm semi-self-aware. I think I was emotionally immature. I definitely was emotionally immature. I did not have high self-awareness at all until after my car accident, when I started actually looking in the mirrors. And again, we can go down that road if you'd like, but I don't want to take us
we're about out of time here. I like everything you're sharing there, and that last bit, what it reminded me of. I can't remember who I heard this from, but I applied it to my life. I've had my company for 12 years, but it was just me and my wife for the first 5. And then 7 years ago, we started adding more people to it. And I've had the title CEO the entire time. But I've realized that when I was by myself, I was simply a doer. When we started adding people, I was becoming a manager. Then I was becoming a leader. And I can honestly say it's just now in the last 2 years that we've gotten to where we're over 20 heads and things like that, where I'm actually a CEO, right? And fulfilling that type of responsibility, because I've delegated and let everybody else take all those vital pieces. It's constant, though. The journey's not over. There's new layers to it that are going to keep on coming. So we have to be intentional as we go with it. So, Alan, I think you and I could talk all day. We'll definitely bring you back again on another episode. But as you are aware, we finish every episode with the same question, because we want practical things for our listeners. So the question we finish every episode with is this: what is something our listeners can do intentionally today to be a better leader?
Go to a whiteboard or a notebook and write down the top 3 most important character traits. I did this with a client earlier today, actually. His name's Bradley. write down the top 3 most important character traits that you value. And then rate yourself from 0 to 10 on those 3 things. And if your answer is not 10 out of 10 on those 3 things, then you cannot expect your team to be embodying those things.
I like it. Practical challenge, listeners. Go after it and do that. Listeners, in our show notes today, you can find all the links of where you can find Alan on social media, his company's website. He has his own podcast that he does. And so a lot of things happen in his life with Next Level University. But Alan, it's been great to have you on the show. Appreciate your insights and look forward to having you back again at some point.
Thank you so much. This was super aligned for me. I love the idea of leadership and especially being an intentional leader. That is something I'm practicing every single day. And every year I thought I was good at it and then I realized I wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
That is the way of it. So keep climbing. We're all a project and we're all a work in progress. And the only wrong answer is to stop trying to get better, I think. So thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Intentional Leader Podcast presented by Revolutionize Professional Coaching. Be sure to see the show notes for links to Revolutionize Professional Coaching and links to contact our guests. Now, hit that subscribe button so that you are alerted with every new episode of the Intentional Leader Podcast.